there have been some issues with Thor's hammer since he took up the throne of Asgard. He feels he is losing the chemistry between him and his hammer, so to be sure, he has to test this theory out. And before we get into it, make sure you hit the subscribe button or like button if you indeed like the video. This picks up with a man named Adam Aziz, a guy who has spent 9 of his youthful years in federal prison for multiple accounts of aggravated assault and armed robbery. Now, he has decided to put his past behind him. He now lives in a small town in Broxton, Oklahoma, fixing cars for the townspeople. And his shop has really been around for longer than he has been, since it was passed from generations to generations, and now he's now looking after the shop. And his shop is not also a fancy big shop with every tool inside, but when the townspeople try to tell him that he has to gather money and buy new wrenches or some screwdrivers, he tells them that he has all that he needs in his hands. And it's true, because even with his limited resources, he still does as good a job as the best mechanics around the area. But whilst he was working on this old pickup, he felt something fell behind him, so he went out there to go check it out, whilst thinking to himself that it's a poor workman that blames his tools. But when he got there, he realized that it was Thor's hammer, and I didn't know why it didn't cross his mind to think of it as being a gift from the gods. Like people needed him to get some new wrenches, so maybe God has gifted him with a hammer. But I mean, he is not a carpenter, so he doesn't really need a hammer. He might need a hammer, but not this big, because even carpenters don't need a hammer this big. So maybe that's probably the reason why he didn't think of the hammer as a gift from the gods. But then when he got to the hammer, he realized there is some inscriptions on the hammer, so he grabbed his phone and started dialing up. But then in Asgard, we see Sif, who is confused as to why Thor would throw his hammer on Earth. And then Thor tells her that like recently he's been having some issues with his hammer, so he decided to test it out to see if the theory he's having is true. And Sif was like, why? Of all places, why Broxton, Oklahoma? And we know the stories behind Thor and Broxton, Oklahoma. And I mean, when Thor basically brought Asgard to Earth, and then it was at Broxton, Oklahoma, and they wanted him to vacate Asgard from that place, and he didn't want to, so he levitated Asgard from the grounds, and he was like, okay, so Asgard is not sitting on Broxton, Oklahoma. What you want to do? And if you want me to do a video about that, let me know in the comment section. And this conversation was being made possible thanks to one of Thor's raven. So Sif asked him why he doesn't use those rectangle devices that Earthlings have, because he's been to Earth, so why wouldn't he use those kind of devices? And he was like, phones? Nah, I prefer my ravens. And Sif tells him those rectangles got game. And I don't know what kind of games she means, but nah, I'm joking. It's probably Temple Run or something. But then Thor is going to have a meeting, a very important meeting with someone, so he asks if she could keep a watch on his hammer whilst he go have an important meeting with Beta Ray Bill. But then when Thor gets here, he tries to act as if he has forgotten what happened like a couple of issues ago, where he tried or where he beat Beta Ray Bill into submission. And so when he said, "You are welcome, you can sit, Bill," Beta Ray Bill asked him whether it's an order. And I can't tell if this is a joke or not. You can look at his face and tell me, but for me, he looks dead as serious. But then Thor then replied him and said no, and that he just needs a drink with an old friend. And Beta Ray Bill were like, okay, good enough for me, because I think he heard something like a drink in Thor's speech, which made it a very compelling argument. Then proceeds to ask Thor, what's going on with you? Which got Thor worried enough to switch modes in like seconds, like going from face lit up to mad worried because of the thought of Thanos winning again and having all those Infinity Stones, the hammer with that black mystery stone on his left arm. And Beta Ray Bill saw the frustration in Thor's eyes, but he intended that as a joke. Thor couldn't tell and I couldn't tell either, but who cares about me? And I love the fact that Thor is trying to act like nothing happened in the previous issues. And clearly you can see Beta Ray Bill is holding a grudge. because whenever Thor asks him a question, he gives a straightforward answer which leaves Thor with no questions to ask. Like he said, "I heard you joined the Guardians of the Galaxy," and Beta Ray Bill said, "Yes, it was glorious." And Thor was left with no questions anymore. But at this point, Beta Ray Bill has realized that Thor is trying to hide something, and these questions that Thor is asking are somewhat silly. So he straight up asks Thor to tell him why he came here, why he invited him here, because if he has forgotten, the last time they met, Thor made it clear to him that he is not of Asgard, which makes Thor not his king. So if Thor doesn't go straight to the point, he will just get up and then leave, because he's had his drink, so he can leave. And you could see for Thor, it's hard for him to give up and ask Beta Ray Bill that he needs some information about Thanos. And this is funny because in the last issue, we saw Silver Surfer directly come up to Thor and ask him to tell him what happened in the battle and see if he can help in a way. But Thor refused to talk to him, and now he has to beg for that information from someone. But mostly, I think it's because of his guilt of having beat Beta Ray Bill in the previous issue. So he just calls Beta Ray Bill here so that he could apologize in a way, and yet still, he still isn't being able to do that. But then we find out that Iron Man has made his way to Buxton, Oklahoma, because he has received a call to his private number, a number that only few people know. So when he got there, Adam Aziz started talking about how he was working on the track and the hammer just fell and was like, and Iron Man was like, no, not that. How did you call me on my private number? A number that only few people know. How did you call me on that? So basically, Thor has used magic to basically inscribe Tony's number on his hammer. Just because in the previous issue, when he threw his hammer from Asgard to Earth, Tony wrote on his hammer. And so he's getting back at him and Tony is furious. But then in Asgard, Beta Ray Bill tells Thor that whilst he was in the Guardians of the Galaxy, Hela had collected the severed head of Thanos in order to resurrect him together with Eros, who at this point Thanos has uploaded his consciousness into him. But then Beta Ray Bill has hammered a black hole into the chest of Thanos and killing him, so he shouldn't be worried about Thanos. But then Thor tells Beta Ray Bill that he fears something is coming, and maybe if he falls and gets corrupted, he needs someone who will stand by his side. But Thor then tells Beta Ray Bill that something is coming for him, and so he needs a second in command. That if he falls, that person will take up from where he left off from. And then Beta Ray Bill said, then you know I will need a new hammer. Like he is almost ready to take up his throne. But then Thor has specifically brought him to the Asgardian armory so that he can choose whatever weapon he wants. And this is when Beta Ray Bill noticed that Thor doesn't have his hammer the whole time he was there. And deep down, I think Beta Ray Bill knows that if Thor falls and will have to take his place, then he will need Thor's hammer, since Thor destroyed his in the previous issues. So an eye for an eye, a hammer for a hammer. So this was when Thor tells Beta Ray Bill, like, yeah, exactly. This is specifically the reason why he called him here, because lately his hammer has been acting up. So in Buxton, Oklahoma, where Iron Man is gladly answering questions from some reporters who even asked him if anyone can lift Thor's hammer and whether Asgard is coming back to Buxton, and he was like, come on. It's Thor's hammer, no one can lift it. Even as awesome as I am, I can't lift it, so no one can lift it up. Suddenly, Iron Man turns to the inscription on the hammer changing from Tony's number to pick it up, and he immediately throws in a shield there because people are crazy and they will be rushing in to try and see if they can pick it up. But whilst Iron Man is still telling people of the shield, Adam Aziz reached in to the hammer and then picked it up, which transformed him into the god of mechanics. God of thunder. And this is Thor's issue, because the problem here is that while the hammer is so easy and simply picked up by Adam Aziz and anyone can pick it up easily, Thor is the only one that finds it hard to pick it up. Thor is the only one that struggles when he picks up the hammer. And so, if anyone can pick it up regardless of their worthiness, then it makes sense that Thanos would have the hammer as a weapon without being worthy of it. So yeah, here we are again. So if you like this video, make sure you hit the like button, and if you like content like this, subscribe to the channel so that we can do this again in the next one. Voila!